again, everyone, and welcome to the second half of Green Tea by Le Fano. If you haven't watched the first video, I would suggest you start with that because not only do I talk more about the author in the first half, this obviously is the second half, and probably going to want to have seen the first half for this to make sense to you. So just before I begin, just the usual warning that this is a Victorian ghost story and themes and comments and opinions may be expressed in this text that are not in keeping with modern sensibilities in terms of things like race, gender, orientation, religion, just about any other thing you can think of. So please do bear that in mind as we go. Hey, it's editing, Emily. I forgot to mention in my original opening, but there's a slightly graphic suicide coming up at the end of chapter 10. If that's not your thing, you may want to duck out of this story a little bit early. Sorry to interrupt. Back to the story. Along. The first half covered the prologue through chapter 6, so we're going to pick up here at chapter 7, and then we'll continue straight on through the epilogue, so this should be the end of it in this video. And we last left the Reverend Jennings poking a possibly demonic monkey with an umbrella on board an omnibus, which is as the name would imply, it is a kind of bus. It's usually pulled by horses. And of course, all of this is being related to Dr. Hesselius, who Jennings has gone to for help with his condition that may or may not have arisen from essentially reading too much about ancient paganism, I guess. Although, regardless of what the origin might be, spooky monkey with red eyes, probably don't, really don't poke any live creature with a stick. That's not a great call generally. But that's where we are. That's where we've left off. And again, I apologize for any misspeaking I may do, any mispronunciations, and I will be adding to the text with my own comment. So here we go, Chapter 7 of Green Tea. Chapter 7, The Journey, First Stage. When the omnibus drove on, and I was alone upon the road, I looked carefully round to ascertain whether the monkey had followed me. To my indescribable relief, I saw it nowhere. I can't describe easily what a shock I had received, and my sense of genuine gratitude on finding myself, as I supposed, quite rid of it. I had got out a little before we reached this house, 200 or 300 steps. A brick wall runs along the footpath, and inside the wall is a hedge of yew or some other dark evergreen of that kind, and within that again the row of fine trees which you may have remarked as you came. This brick wall is about as high as my shoulder, and happening to raise my eyes I saw the monkey, with that stooping gait on all fours, walking or creeping, close behind me on top of the wall. I stopped looking at it with a feeling of loathing and horror. As I stopped, so did it. It sat up on the wall with its long hands on its knees, looking at me. There was not light enough to see it much more than in outline, nor was it dark enough to bring the peculiar light of its eyes into strong relief. I still saw, however, that red foggy light plainly enough. It did not show its teeth, nor exhibit any sign of irritation, but seemed jaded and sulky, and was observing me steadily. So let's think about this from the monkey's perspective for a moment. Let's say you are a demon infernal monkey for whatever reason. You've appeared on Earth in a 19th century omnibus, which by all accounts was not always the most pleasant way to travel. You're looking around. Maybe you're supposed to haunt this guy. Maybe you're not. But and then the guy starts poking at you with his umbrella. And really all you've done is sort of look at him in a creepy way, which is sort of subjective when it comes to animals. You get off and follow him, and now the guy's like, oh, you're just a little sulky there, monkey. It's like, you should be glad this monkey hasn't jumped off that wall to fuck you up, because monkeys and apes will do that. So, I don't know. I think Jennings getting off pretty lightly here, considering he was teasing the demon monkey not so long ago. It's like all those signs in Florida, don't Don't tease the alligators, man. It's a bad call. Competition between you and nature. Nature's probably going to win 9 times out of 10. I drew back into the middle of the road. It was an unconscious recoil, and there I stood, still looking at it. It did not move. With an instinctive determination to try something, anything, I turned about and walked briskly towards town with a scant look, all the time watching the movements of the beast. It crept swiftly along the wall, at exactly my pace. Where the wall ends, near the turn of the road, it came down, and with a wiry spring or two brought itself close to my feet, and continued to keep up with me as I quickened my pace. It was at my left side, so close to my leg that I felt every movement as if I should tread upon it. The road was quite deserted and silent, and it was darker every moment. I stopped, dismayed and bewildered, turning as I did so the other way, I mean towards this house, away from which I had been walking. When I stood still, the monkey drew back to a distance of, I suppose, about 5 or 6 yards, and remained stationary, watching me. I had been more agitated than I have said. I had read, of course, as everyone has, something about spectral illusions, as you physicians term the phenomenon of such cases. I considered my situation, and looked my misfortune in the face. These affections, I had read, are sometimes transitory and sometimes obstinate. I had read of cases in which the appearance, at first harmless, had, step by step, degenerated into something direful and insupportable, and ended by wearing its victim out, so like a classic haunting. Still, as I stood there, but for my bestial companion, quite alone, I tried to comfort myself by repeating again and again the assurance, the thing is purely disease, a well-known physical affection as distinct as smallpox or neuralgia. Doctors are all agreed on that. Philosophy demonstrates it. I must not be a fool. I've been sitting up too late, and I dare say my digestion is quite wrong, and with God's help, I shall be all right, and this is but a symptom of nervous dyspepsia, which is a classic Victorian illness, dyspepsia, being dyspeptic. Basically, they blamed a lot of things on an upset digestive system, and they could find a way to attribute just about any symptom to dyspepsia, especially if you happen to be female. If you were female back then, the two diagnoses you're most likely to get are dyspepsia of some kind, or, of course, the classic female hysteria. But don't worry, Dr. Kellogg will cure you with his butt yogurt. Did I believe all this? Not one word of it. No more than any other miserable being ever did who was once seized and riveted in this satanic captivity. Against my convictions, I might say my knowledge, I was simply bullying myself into a false courage. Hey, it works. That works sometimes. Don't knock the old fake it till you make it way of doing things. I now walked homeward. I had only a few hundred yards to go. I had forced myself into a sort of resignation, but I had not got over the sickening shock and the flurry of the first certainty of my misfortune. I made up my mind to pass the night at home. I mean, that's where most of us pass the night. That's not that weird. The brute moved close beside me. I mean, you don't have any evidence that it's a brute thus far. All it's done is be kind of creepy. And I fancied there was the sort of anxious drawing towards the house, which one sees in tired horses or dogs sometimes as they come toward home. I was afraid to go into town. I was afraid of anyone seeing and recognizing me. I was conscious of an irrepressible agitation in my manner. Also, I was afraid of any violent change in my habits, such as going to a place of amusement or walking from home in order to fatigue myself. At the hall door, it waited till I mounted the steps, and when the door was open, entered with me. Don't let the creepy monkey in your house. Jeez. That's like horror movie 101. Mind you, I guess in this time period, it's not a trope or a cliche yet. I drank no tea that night. I got cigars and some brandy water. Yeah, that's way better. Strong cigars and brandy water. Yeah, no, that's better than tea, of course. My idea was that I should act upon my material system, and by living for a while in sensation apart from thought, send myself forcibly, as it were, into a new groove. I came up here to this drawing room. I sat just here. The monkey then got upon a small table that then stood there. It looked dazed and languid. An irrepressible uneasiness as to its movements kept my eyes always upon it. Its eyes were half closed, but I could see them glow. It was looking steadily at me. In all situations, at all hours, it is awake and looking at me. That never changes. I shall not continue in detail my narrative of this particular night. I shall describe rather the phenomena of the first year, which never varied essentially. I shall describe the monkey as it appeared in daylight. In the dark, as you shall presently hear, there are peculiarities. It is a small monkey, perfectly black. It had only one peculiarity, other than being, translucent. A character of malignity. Pardon me, unfathomable malignity. During the first year it looked sullen and sick, but this chapter of intense malice and vigilance was always underlying that surly languor. During all that time it acted as if on a plan of giving me as little trouble as was consistent with watching me. Its eyes were never off me. I have never lost sight of it except in my sleep, light or dark, day or night, since it came here, expecting when it withdraws for some weeks at a time, excepting, rather, when it withdraws for some weeks at a time unaccountably. In total dark it is visible as in daylight. I do not mean merely its eyes. It is all visible distinctly in a halo that resembles a glow of red embers, and which accompanies it in all its movements. When it leaves me for a time, it is always at night, in the dark, and in the same way. It grows at first uneasy, and then furious, and then advances towards me, grinning and shaking its paws clenched, and, at the same time, there comes the appearance of fire in the grate. I never have any fire. I can't sleep in a room where there is any, and it draws nearer and nearer to the chimney, quivering, it seems, with rage. And when its fury rises to the highest pitch, it springs into the grate and up the chimney, and I see it no more. When first this happened, I thought I was released. I was a new man. A day passed, a night, and no return, and a blessed week, another week. I was always on my knees, Dr. Hesselius, always thanking God and praying. A whole month passed of liberty, but on a sudden, it was with me again. Right now we have chapter 8, the second stage. It was with me, and the malice which before was torpid under a sullen exterior, was now active. It was perfectly unchanged in every other respect. This new energy was apparent in its activities and its looks, and soon in other ways. For a time, you will understand, the change was shown only in an increased vivacity and an air of menace, as if it was always brooding over some atrocious plan. Its eyes, as before, were never off me. "Is it here now?" I asked. "No," he replied. "It has been absent exactly a fortnight and a day, 15 days. It has sometimes been away so long as nearly 2 months, once for 3. Its absence always exceeds a fortnight, although it may be by a single day. 15 days having passed since I saw it last, it may return now at any moment." Is its return," I asked, "accompanied by any peculiar manifestation? The whole thing's a peculiar manifestation." "Nothing, no," he said. "It is simply with me again. On lifting my eyes from a book, or turning my head, I see it, as usual, looking at me, and then it remains as before, for its appointed time. I have never told so much and so minutely before to anyone." I perceived that he was agitated and looking like death. I'm pretty sure death is stalking him at this point. And it's not looking like it's going to be a good death either. And he repeatedly applied his handkerchief to his forehead. I suggested that he might be tired. and told him that I would call with pleasure in the morning. But he said, "No, if you don't mind hearing it all now. I have got so far, and I should prefer making one effort of it." When I spoke to Dr. Harley, I had nothing like so much to tell. "You are a philosophic physician. You give spirit its proper rank, if the thing is real." He paused, looking at me with agitated inquiry. "We can discuss it by and by, and very fully. I will give you all I think," I answered after an interval. "Well, very well. If it is anything real, I say, it is prevailing little by little and drawing me more interiorly into hell. Optic nerves, he talked of. Ah, well, there are other nerves of communication. May God Almighty help me, you shall hear. Its power of action, I tell you, had increased. Its malice became, in a way, aggressive. About 2 years ago, some questions that were pending between me and the bishop having been settled, I went down to my parish in Warwickshire, anxious to find occupation in my profession. I was not prepared for what happened, although I have since thought I might have apprehended something of it. I mean, I think we all do. I think we all sense, hon, what's going to happen when you try to go to preach in your church with your new demonic monkey companion. The reason of my saying so is this. He was beginning to speak with a great deal more effort and reluctance, and sighed often, and seemed at times nearly overcome. But at times his manner was not so agitated. It was more like that of a sinking patient who had given himself up. Fair, though. I don't know if I would have given myself up or not, but it's pretty obvious that Jennings, especially with his attitude to the other doctors, probably not seeing himself getting out of this. "Yes, but I will first tell you about Kenlis, my parish. It was with me when I left this place for Dalbridge. It was my silent travelling companion, and it remained with me at the vicarage. When I entered on the discharge of my duties, another change took place. The thing exhibited an atrocious determination to thwart me. It was with me in the church, in the reading desk. Maybe the monkey folds himself up on one of those old reading desks with the little sliding door, just shuts it on himself. I need some alone time. Within the communion rails. At last it reached this extremity, that while I was reading to the congregation, it would spring upon the open book and squat there, so that I was unable to see the page. This happened more than once. I mean, I have a cat, and when he squats, there are worse things that happen. So be thankful the monkey was just sitting on the page and not doing anything worse, is all I'm saying. I left Dalbridge for a time. I placed myself in Dr. Harley's hands. I did everything he told me. He gave my case a great deal of thought. It interested him, I think. He seemed successful. For nearly 3 months I was perfectly free from a return. I began to think I was safe. With his full assent, I returned to Dalbridge. I travelled in a chaise. I was in good spirits. I was happy and grateful. I was returning, as I thought, delivered from a dreadful hallucination, to the scene of duties which I longed to enter upon. It was a beautiful sunny evening. Everything looked serene and cheerful, and I was delighted. I remember looking out of the window to see the spire of my church at Kenlis among the trees, at the point where one has the earliest view of it. It is exactly where the little stream that bounds the parish passes under the road by a culvert, and where it emerges at the roadside, a stone with an old inscription is placed. As we passed this point, I drew my head in and sat down, and in the corner of the chaise was the monkey. For a moment I felt faint, and then, quite wild with despair and horror, I called to the driver and got out, and sat down at the roadside and prayed to God silently for mercy. A despairing resignation supervened. My companion was with me as I re-entered the vicarage. The same persecution followed. After a short struggle I submitted, and soon I left the place. "I told you," he said, "that the beast has before this become in certain ways aggressive. I will explain a little. It seemed to be actuated by intense and increasing fury whenever I said my prayers, or even meditated prayer. It amounted at last to a dreadful interruption. You will ask, how could a silent, immaterial phantom effect that? It was thus. Whenever I meditated praying, it was always before me. nearer and nearer. It used to spring on a table, on the back of a chair, on the chimney piece, and slowly to swing itself from side to side, looking at me all the time. There is in its motion an indefinable power to dissipate thought, and to contract one's attention to that monotony, till the sides shrink, as it were, to a point, and at last till the ideas shrink, as it were, to a point, and at last to nothing. And unless I had started up and shook off the catalepsy, I have felt as if my mind were on the point of losing itself. There are other ways, he sighed heavily. Thus, for instance, while I pray with my eyes closed, it comes closer and closer, and I see it. I know it is not to be accounted for physically, but I do actually see it, though my lids are closed. And so it rocks my mind, as it were, and overpowers me, and I am obliged to rise from my knees. If you had ever yourself known this, you would be acquainted with desperation. And here we go, chapter 9, third stage. I see, Dr. Hesselius, that you don't lose one word of my statement. I need not ask you to listen specially to what I am now going to tell you. They talk of the optic nerves and of spectral illusions, as if the organ of sight was the only point assailable by the influences that have fastened upon me. I know better. For 2 years in my direful case that limitation prevailed, but as food is taken softly at the lips and then brought under the teeth, as the tip of the little finger caught in a mill crank will draw in the hand and the arm and the whole body, that's really macabre. So the miserable mortal who has once been caught firmly by the end of the finest fiber of his nerve, is drawn in and in by the enormous machinery of hell until he is as I am. Yes, doctor, as I am. For while I talk to you and implore relief, I feel that my prayer is for the impossible, and my pleading with the inexorable. Pardon me. My brain just sort of shut off there when I saw that word. Inexorable. I endeavored to calm his visibly increasing agitation, and told him that he must not despair. While we talked, the night had overtaken us. Filmy moonlight was wide over the scene which the window commanded, and I said, "Perhaps you would prefer having candles. The light, you know, is odd. I should wish you, as much as possible, under your usual conditions while I make my diagnosis, shall I call it. Otherwise, I don't care." "All lights are the same to me," he said, "except when I read or write. I care not if night were perpetual. I am going to tell you what happened about a year ago." The thing began to speak to me. "Speak? How do you mean? Speak as a man does, do you mean?" "Yes, speak in words and consecutive sentences, with perfect coherence and articulation. But there is a peculiarity. It is not like the tone of a human voice, well, probably because it's a monkey, to say. It is not by my ears it reaches me. It comes singing through my head. Could be demons, could be the crazy monkey, could be mental illness, just saying. This faculty, the power of speaking to me, will be my undoing. It won't let me pray. It interrupts me with dreadful blasphemies. I dare not go on. I could not. Oh, doctor, can the skill and thought and prayers of men avail me of nothing? You must promise me, my dear sir, not to trouble yourself with unnecessary and exciting thoughts. Confine yourself strictly to the narrative of facts, and recollect, above all, that even if the thing that infests you be as you be as you seem to suppose, a reality with an actual independent life and will, yet it can have no power to hurt you, unless it be given from above. Its access to your senses depends mainly upon your physical condition. This, under God, your comfort and reliance, we are all alike environed. It is only that in your case the Paries, the veil of the flesh, the screen, is a little out of repair, and sights and sounds are transmitted. We must enter on a new course, sir. Be encouraged. I'll give tonight the careful consideration of the whole case. So that is apparently a thing, like if you start losing your sight, but you're not aware of it yet, apparently like the part of your brain that does the processing basically gets kind of bored with not receiving any input, and it creates things for you to see. So you hallucinate, but not because you're being haunted by a demon monkey, and not because you have like a mental illness, but basically because that processing part of your brain is bored. So maybe Jennings needs to get his eyes checked. Seems like that would be like some glasses or whatever it is would be a way easier fix than either dealing with profound mental illness or exorcising a demonic hell monkey. You are very good, sir. You think it worth trying. You don't give me quite up, but, sir, you don't know. It is gaining such an influence over me. It orders me about. It is such a tyrant, and I'm growing so helpless. May God deliver me. I wonder what the monkey tells him to do. Make me a sandwich, Reverend Jennings. It orders you about. Of course you mean by speech. Yes, yes, it is always urging me to crimes. Oh, that's not as funny. To injure others or myself. You see, doctor, the situation is urgent. It is indeed. When I was in Shropshire a few weeks ago, Mr. Jennings was speaking rapidly and trembling now, holding my arm with one hand and looking in my face. I went out one day with a party of friends for a walk. My persecutor, I tell you, was with me at the time. I lagged behind the rest. The county near the Dee, you know, is beautiful. Our path happened to lie near a coal mine, and at the verge of the woods is a perpendicular shaft, they say 150 feet deep. My niece had remained behind with me. She knows, of course, nothing of the nature of my suffering. She knew, however, that I had been ill and was low, and she remained to prevent my being quite alone. As we loitered slowly on together, the brute that accompanied me was urging me to throw myself down the shaft. I tell you now, oh, sir, think of it. The one consideration that saved me from that hideous death was the fear lest the shock of witnessing the occurrence should be too much for the poor girl. I asked her to go on and take her walk with her friends, saying that I could go no further. She made excuses, and the more I urged her, the firmer she became. She looked doubtful and frightened. I suppose there was something in my looks or manner that alarmed her, but she would not go, and that literally saved me. You had no idea, sir, that a living man could be made so abject a slave of Satan, he said, with a ghastly groan and a shudder. But that's in the Bible. Anybody who had read the Bible would be like, yeah, I totally believe that. Slave of Satan, for sure. Satan's up to those sorts of shenanigans all the time. There was a pause here, and I said, you were preserved nonetheless. It was the act of God. You are in his hands and in the power of no other being. Be therefore confident for the future. Gotta say, I think Dr. Huselius is taking it pretty well in stride. Like, he's not discounting what Jennings is saying. He's not saying that he's crazy. He's actually being a pretty good doctor and saying, you know what, just let me observe you. Let me see what's going on. Let me observe you in your natural habitat, basically, and then we'll try and figure it out, which is pretty practical. Good for Dr. Huselius, not diagnosing this man with dyspepsia or whatever and throwing him in an institution, which he would have been well within his rights to do at the time. So here we go, chapter 10, Home. I made him have candles lighted, and saw the room looking cheery and inhabited before I left him. I told him that he must regard his illness strictly as one dependent on physical, though subtle physical causes. I told him that he had evidence of God's care and love in the deliverance which he had just described, and that I had perceived with pain that he seemed to regard its peculiar features as indicating that he had been delivered over to spiritual reprobation. See? Pretty practical doctor. Than such a conclusion nothing could be. I insisted less warranted, and not only so, but more contrary to fact, as disclosed in his mysterious deliverance from that murderous influence during his Shropshire excursion. First, his niece had been retained by his side without his intending to keep her near him, and secondly, there had been infused into his mind an irresistible repugnance to execute the dreadful suggestion in her presence. As I reasoned this point with him, Mr. Jennings wept. He seemed comforted. One promise I exacted, which was that should the monkey return at any time, I should be sent for immediately, and repeating my assurance that I would give neither time nor thought to any other subject until I had thoroughly investigated his case, and that tomorrow he should hear the result, I took my leave. Before getting into the carriage, I told the servant that his master was far from well, and that he should make a point of frequently looking into his room. My own arrangements I made with a view to being quite secure from interruption. I merely called at my lodgings, and with a travelling desk and carpet-bag, set off in a hackney carriage for an inn about 2 miles out of town, called the Horns. I don't know if that's an intentional satanic reference or not, but I'm glad that that's in there. A very quiet and comfortable house, with good thick walls. And there I resolved, without the possibility of intrusion or distraction, to devote some hours of the night in my comfortable sitting room to Mr. Jennings' case and so much of the morning as it might require. Pardon me, cat hair. There occurs here a careful note of Dr. Hesselius's opinion upon the case and of the habits, dietary, and medicines which he prescribed. It is curious. Some persons would say mystical. But on the whole, I doubt whether it would sufficiently interest a reader of the kind I am likely to meet with to warrant its being here reprinted. The whole letter was plainly written at the inn where he had hid himself for the occasion. The next letter is dated from his town lodging. I want to know what he wrote. What's the prescription for getting rid of a hallucination or possibly genuine haunting of a blackened, red-eyed monkey that's urging you to do crimes and commit suicide? What do you even prescribe for that? I want to know. I left town for the inn where I slept last night at 9:30 and did not arrive at my room in town until 1 o'clock this afternoon. I found a letter in Mr. Jennings' hand upon my table. It had not come by post, and, on inquiry, I learned that Mr. Jennings' servant had brought it, and on learning that I was not to return until today, and that no one could tell him my address, he seemed very uncomfortable, and said that his orders from his master were that he was not to return without an answer. I opened the letter and read, "Dear Dr. Hesselius, it is here. You had not been gone an hour when it returned. It is speaking. It knows all that has happened. It knows everything. It knows you, and is frantic and atrocious. It reviles. I send you this. It knows every word I have written. I write. This I promised and therefore write, but I fear very confused, very incoherently. I am so interrupted, disturbed. Ever yours, sincerely yours, Robert Lynder Jennings." "When did this come?" I asked. "About 11 last night. The man was here again, and has been here 3 times today, the last time about an hour since." Thus answered, and with the notes I had made upon the case in my pocket, I was in a few minutes driving towards Richmond to see Mr. Jennings. I am by no means, as you perceive, despaired of Mr. Jennings' case. He had himself remembered and applied, though quite in a mistaken way, the principle which I lay down in my metaphysical medicine, and which governs all cases. I was about to apply it in earnest. I was profoundly interested, and very anxious to see and examine him while the enemy was actually present. I drove up to the sombre house, and ran up the steps and knocked. The door, in a little time, was opened by a tall woman in black silk. She looked ill, and as if she had been crying. She curtsied and heard my question, but she did not answer. She turned her face away, extending her hand towards 2 men who were coming downstairs, and thus having, as it were, tacitly made me over to them, she passed through a side door hastily and shut it. The man who was nearest the hall I at once accosted, but being now close to him, I was shocked to see that both his hands were covered with blood. I drew back a little, and the man passing downstairs merely said in a low tone, "Here's the servant, sir." The servant had stopped on the stairs, confounded and dumb at seeing me. He was rubbing his hands in a handkerchief, and it was steeped in blood. "Jones, what is it? What has happened?" I asked, while a sickening suspicion overpowered me. The man asked me to come up to the lobby. I was beside him in a moment, and frowning and pallid, with contracted eyes, he told me the horror which I already half guessed. His master had made away with himself. I went upstairs with him to the room. What I saw there I won't tell you. He had cut his throat with his razor. It was a frightful gush. The two men had laid him on the bed and composed his limbs. It had happened, as the immense pool of blood on the floor declared, at some distance between the bed and the window. I'm not going to tell you, but here's the really vivid description. There was carpet round his bed and a carpet under his dressing table, but none on the rest of the floor, for the man said he did not like a carpet on his bedroom. In this sombre and now terrible room, one of the great elms that darkened the house was slowly moving the shadow of one of its great boughs upon this dreadful floor. I beckoned to the servant, and we went downstairs together. I turned off the hall into an old-fashioned panelled room, and, standing there, I heard all the servant had to tell. It was not a great deal. "I concluded, sir, from your words and looks, sir, as you had left last night, that you thought my master seriously ill. I thought it might be that you were afraid of a fit or something, so I attended very closely to your directions. He sat up late, till past 3 o'clock. He was not writing or reading. He was talking a great deal to himself, but that was nothing unusual. At about that hour I assisted him to undress, and left him in his slippers and dressing-gown. I went back softly in about half an hour. He was in bed, quite undressed, and a pair of candles lighted on the table beside his bed. He was leaning on his elbow and looking out at the other side of the bed when I came in. I asked him if he wanted anything, and he said no. I don't know whether it was what you said to me, sir, or something a little unusual about him, but I was uneasy, uncommon easy, about him last night. In another half hour, or it might be a little more, I went up again. I did not hear him talking as before. I opened the door a little. The candles were both out, which was not unusual. I had a bedroom candle, and I let the light in, a little bit, looking softly round. I saw him sitting in that chair beside the dressing-table with his clothes on again. He turned round and looked at me. I thought it strange he should get up and dress, and put out the candles to sit in the dark that way. But I only asked him again if I could do anything for him. He said no, rather sharp, I thought. I asked if I might light the candles, and he said, "Do as you like, Jones." So I lighted them, and I lingered about the room, and he said, "Tell me the truth, Jones. Why did you come again? You did not hear anyone cursing?" "No, sir," I said, wondering what he could mean. "No," he said after me, "of course, no." And I said to him, "Wouldn't it be well, sir, you went to bed? It's just 5 o'clock." And he said nothing but, "Very likely. Good night, Jones." So I went, sir, but in less than an hour I came again. The door was fast, and he heard me, and called as I thought from the bed to know what I wanted, and he desired me not to disturb him again. I lay down and slept a little. It must have been between 6 and 7 when I went up again. The door was still fast, and he made no answer. So I did not like to disturb him, and thinking he was asleep, I left him till 9. It was his custom to ring when he wished me to come, and I had no particular hour for calling him. I tapped very gently, and getting no answer, I stayed away a good while, supposing he was getting some rest then. It was not till 11 o'clock I grew really uncomfortable about him, for at the latest he was, never, that I could remember, later than 10:30. I got no answer. I knocked and called, still no answer. So not being able to force the door, I called Thomas from the stables, and together we forced it, and found him in the shocking way you saw him. Jones had no more to tell. Poor Mr. Jennings was very gentle and very kind. All his people were fond of him. I could see that the servant was very much loved. So, dejected and agitated, I passed from that terrible house and its dark canopy of elms, and I hope I shall never see it more. While I write to you, I feel like a man who has but half waked from a frightful and monotonous dream. My memory rejects the picture with incredulity and horror, yet I know it is true. It is, a, it is the story of the process of a poison which excites the reciprocal action of spirit and nerve, and paralyzes the tissue that separates those cognate functions of the senses, the external and the interior. Thus we find strange bedfellows, and the mortal and immortal permanently make acquaintance. Sorry for the silly face there. Very thirsty. This light actually makes it pretty warm. And here we have, finally, our conclusion for green tea. A word for those who suffer. My dear Van L., you have suffered from an affection similar to that which I have just described. You twice complained of a return of it. Who, under God, cured you? Your humble servant, Martin Hesselius. Let me rather adopt the more emphasized piety of a certain good old French surgeon of 300 years ago. I treated, and God cured you. Come, my friend, you are not to be hippish. Let me tell you a fact. I have met with and treated, as my book shows, 57 cases of this kind of vision, which I term indifferently sublimated, precocious, and interior. There is another class of affections which are truly termed, though commonly confounded with those which I described, spectral illusions. These latter I look upon as being no less simply curable than a cold in the head or a trifling dyspepsia. It is those which rank in the first category that test our promptitude of thought. 57 such cases I have encountered, neither more nor less. And in how many of those have I failed? In no one single instance. There is no one affection of mortality more easily and certainly reducible, with a little patience and a rational confidence in the physician. With these simple conditions, I look upon the cure as absolutely certain. You are to remember that I had not even commenced to treat Mr. Jennings' case. I have no doubt that I should have cured him perfectly in 18 months, or possibly it might have extended to 2 years. Some cases are very rapidly curable, others extremely tedious. Every intelligent physician who will give thought and diligence to the task will effect a cure. That's a pretty big brag. If Dr. Harley, who is like one of the best physicians for the time and place, couldn't do it, I don't know that you necessarily could. That's a pretty big brag. You know my tract on the cardinal functions of the brain. I there, by the evidence of innumerable facts, prove, as I think, the high probability of a circulation arterial and venomous in its mechanism through the nerves. Of this system, thus considered, the brain is the heart. The fluid, which is propagated hence through one class of nerves, returns in an altered state through another, and the nature of that fluid is spiritual, though not immaterial, any more than, as I before remarked, light or electricity are so. By various abuses, among which the habitual use of such agent of, pardon me, let me try that again. By various abuses, among which the habitual use of such agents as green tea is one, this fluid may be affected as to its quality, but it is more frequently disturbed as to equilibrium. There you go. There, the problem was the tea. The green tea disturbed his weird brain spiritual heart juice and made him susceptible to demonic monkeys. I mean, that's about on par for lots of medical theories originating in the 19th century, so that's a pretty big claim though. Green tea did this. Not like the cocaine that we prescribe for everything. It's like that meme, 19th century medicine, you have ghosts in your blood and you should do cocaine about it. This fluid being that which we have in common with spirits, a congestion found upon the masses of brain or nerve, connected with the interior sense, forms a surface unduly exposed on which disembodied spirits may operate. Communication is thus more or less effectively established. Between this brain circulation and the heart circulation, there is an intimate sympathy. The seat, or rather the instrument of exterior vision, is the eye. The seat of interior vision is the nervous tissue and brain, immediately about and above the eyebrow. You remember how effectively I dissipated your pictures by the simple application of ice eau de cologne. That never happened. You did not. Iced perfume water did not make some dude's hallucinations go away. Facts. Few cases, however, can be treated exactly alike with anything like rapid success. Cold acts powerfully as a repellent of the nervous fluid. Guess that's why forced cold water baths were a thing. Long enough continued, it will even produce that permanent insensibility, which we call numbness, and a little longer, muscular as well as sensational paralysis. I have not, I repeat, the slightest doubt that I should have first dimmed and ultimately sealed that inner eye which Mr. Jennings had inadvertently opened. The same senses are opened in delirium tremens, and entirely shut up again when the overaction of the cerebral heart and the prodigious nervous congestions that attend it are terminated by a decided change in the state of the body. It is by acting steadily upon the body by a simple process that this result is produced, and inevitably produced. I have never yet failed. Poor Mr. Jennings made away with himself, but that catastrophe, pardon me, Poor Mr. Jennings made away with himself, but that catastrophe was the result of a totally different malady, which, as it were, projected itself upon the disease which was established. His case was in the distinctive matter of a complication, and the complaint under which he really succumbed was hereditary suicidal mania. Poor Mr. Jennings I cannot call a patient of mine, for I had not even begun to treat his case, and he had not yet given me, I am convinced, his full and unreserved confidence. If the patient do not array himself on the side of the disease, his cure is certain. And that is the end of Green Tea by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. Le Fanu. However, as I said before, however Frenchly you would like to pronounce that. So there you go. If you drink too much green tea or any other agent or substance, although you would think the cigars and brandy water, if green tea will do it, surely cigars and brandy water absolutely would. If you mess up your brain, heart, spirit fluid with green tea and then go reading about crazy old-timey pagan rituals, you're going to summon a devil to haunt you and drive you to suicide. So that's the moral of this story, such as it has one. So I hope you enjoyed green tea. And Le Fanu has a lot, as I said in the previous installment, he has a lot of other stories that are just as good. I actually quite like a lot of his other works. Maybe I will read another one. We'll have to see. So if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like, please share it around. And if there is a particular story you would like me to read, please leave a suggestion in the comments section below. I am always very happy to take requests. Green tea was actually a request, so do feel free. I'm sure everyone would enjoy it. So thank you very much for listening, everyone. Bye.